Okay, sweet. I found it. Look at that. I'm a human.
Yay!
I can do things.
Can find the buttons,
So,
make them work.
exactly. Okay, well, welcome folks who are potentially, hopefully, all following from the first episode that we recorded together. But I think there was mention in that episode of wanting to do a part two because we totally did not talk about the Romans or
No.
the sport and spectacle aspect of
Yeah.
horses. We only did war stuff and Alexander, which very interesting, but also they're not the only things. So
No. No. We've made horses do a lot of weird, weird stuff.
really weird
God
stuff.
bless them. Bless those horses. Bless those ponies.
Right? Ugh, poor things. So, I will caveat this for anyone listening and say I took one ancient sport and spectacles class in college, and it was amazing. But it didn't really focus on horses, and I was very, very sad. But I suppose understandable. And then I will say that I want to start this episode with the closest frame of reference I have for a horse thing. And on the Reading Party podcast, we ended our season a couple weeks ago doing Ben Hur, which involves some very interesting chariot races, but like not in Rome, in like Judea. So I was like, I don't know if the same rules apply. So I figured let's just start there and jump into chariot racing because I know in ancient Rome it was like their most popular sport. Um, and I remember because I just listened to the episode just so I could prepare. I went on this whole ass tangent about how they they copied over like the ancient Greek Tethrippon. And I was like, oh, interesting. And I was like, but that wasn't the most popular if I remember correctly in Rome. So I was like, why did they use the Tethrippon in this very Roman movie? So I figured that's a great starting point since I went on a whole ass tangent. So um, yeah, do you want to tell us what a Teth Ripon is? I
Yeah.
am like so confused.
So, I mean, first to answer your kind of question about Ben-Hur and how they had, very Roman-looking chariot racing in Judea, that's true. There are some really well preserved hippodromes, so racetracks. In Greek, we call them a hippodrome, which literally just means the place where horses run, and then in Latin, we call them a circus, but they're the same thing. So they become these purpose-built, often permanent structures because of the popularity of the sport, and they're found across the Roman Empire, like all the way from kind of northern England to Judea. There are some of the best preserved ones are across North Africa, especially in Tunisia and Libya. So yeah, there we sort of get a standardized track of sorts. So yes, you would have had at that time, you would have had Roman style chariot racing in all of the provinces, including Judea. And then yes, so the Tethrippon again, that's a Greek word. So the Tethrippon is the four-horse chariot. So in Greek chariot, well, in Greek sport, you had the ridden horse races, which we called the keles, and then you had the chariot races. So there was the two horse, the sonorous, and the four horse, which is the Tethrippon. The ridden horse race doesn't really translate over to the Roman world, but the chariot races do. And they're probably also getting inspiration from the Etruscans and stuff as well. So the Greeks to the south and the Etruscans to the north of Rome, because southern Italy was Magna Graecia, so all sorts of Greek colonies. So yeah, the Tethrippon becomes the quadriga in the Roman world, which is the four horse, and the sonorous becomes the biga, which is the two horse. And so actually the four horse chariot race does sort of remain the most prestigious in the Roman sort of horse racing world, in the Roman circus and the Roman hippodromes. The two horse exists as well. And then we get, because Roman emperors are batshit crazy, and some of them were absolutely obsessed with chariot racing, which I'm sure we'll get into. They like they introduce like there's like a 10 horse chariot, but you have to keep in mind like it's not horses in rows of two, it's like 10 horses across, right? So when the Roman, if you think of kind of, I don't know, like the Budweiser Clydesdales, which obviously are not racing, but like the Budweiser hitch, you have like two, 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 right? All kind of harnessed in front of each other. That's not how the Romans harnessed their horses. That's not how we harnessed horses in the ancient world. It was across. So this would be like 10 horses across. So there is a seal stone somewhere that I've seen in one of the museums that shows this, and it's absolutely ridiculous. Like a gem ring, an intaglio. It's insane. It's ridiculous. But yeah. So, but the main ones are the four horse, which we will in this podcast refer to as the quadriga, because that's the Latin term for it, and then the two horse, which is the biga. Those are the standard arrangements for your racing chariots.
Ah, those are so cool. I mean, yeah, I think, and then the other thing I noticed was, and I'm so happy that I have you to ask because I remember I probably sounded idiotic trying to figure it out myself, and wasting a lot of time in the other episode. But um, they have these dedicated shots, right, on like these fish-shaped water jugs that, every time they would do the loop, they would kind of turn over. So I was like, well, from memory, I believe the Greeks did 7 laps, but sometimes five. But I was also like, I do not remember slash never heard of a water jug, like a fish, used to mark laps. So is that historically accurate or no?
Yes. So again, if we're looking at the Greek world and thinking like primarily about like the Olympics and the Pan-Hellenic Games, the Greeks didn't build permanent hippodromes like Roman Empire Greeks. They did not build permanent hippodromes. It was sort of because you need a huge space. So, for example, at Olympia, there's kind of a general idea of where they may have made the racetrack, but it was never like a set thing. It would sort of be you need to go out and find like a reasonably flat surface, try and remove as many sort of rocks and obstacles as you can and try and make it as flat and smooth as you can. So because they weren't building permanent structures, there was no what we call the spina, which is the barrier down the middle that separates one side of the track from the other. So one of the tropes and one of the things that did happen quite frequently in Greek chariot racing were head-on collisions, because you'd have chariots racing up and down the track depending on how fast they're going and where they are kind of in the place order. So I think like Pindar, I think it's Pindar, probably Pindar, describes like one race at maybe it was I can't remember exactly. It wasn't Olympia. I feel it was like Nemea or maybe Pythia, the games, where there was like I don't know some stupid number that started and only one finished because the rest were like all of these head-on collisions because there was no barrier to prevent it. The Romans, being the Romans, they're like, we're gonna up the ante and make things more sophisticated and more, I don't know, engineering. So they build these permanent structures, these circuses or permanent hippodromes. And what they put down the center of their track, it's called a spina, so the spine, and it's the basically the barrier that separates one side of the track from the other. So as they're racing around, there is this structure going down the middle, which the Romans, of course, then turn into spectacular propaganda, as you do. And so you're putting statues there, you're putting inscriptions at things there, sort of like celebrating the track and the charioteers and horses and emperors and stuff like that. But one of the iconic elements of the spina is the water counter. And so that is real. So if I am recalling correctly, because I think I need more caffeine, that yeah, generally the Roman races were 7 laps of the track. So there'd be 7 dolphins or fish or whatever they were using at that particular track. I think the Circus Maximus used dolphins. And so after every lap, a dolphin would drop down. So when you're thinking about the size of, which we will talk about, the size of these venues, they are absolutely massive. So it's a way for people in the audience, again, to just keep track of what lap they're on. You think of the dust and the mayhem and all of that. So yes, the Romans did have these water counters as part of the spectacle of the track to keep track of which lap they were on.
Then I owe these producers an apology because I think I gave them a bit of a hard time for
Yep.
historically inaccurate things. So I'm very sorry, people who made this film, who will never hear this, but it's fine. I've apologized, so I can feel better now. Yeah, let us talk about the size because I feel like it's really interesting. I do a lot of reception work, and so I feel like in watching a ton of media and stuff, every single place is Circus Maximus. Now I'm like, okay, now in Rome you had the one Circus Maximus. Now I know it's Maximus, it just makes it bigger, like the main one, right? So I'm like, so is it correct to be like, yeah, every place had its own Circus Maximus? Because I'm just like, what on earth, like, does it take to be a Circus Maximus? Like, can you have a regular circus, or does every place have to have, you know, their own?
So the Circus Maximus refers specifically to the one in Rome because it is by far the largest. So again, thanks to media, pop culture, Most people, when they think of spectacle in Rome, they're like gladiators. And of course, we were recording this shortly after Gladiator 2 came out, so everything is all about like gladiators all the time. And well, the arena, right? So again, the Colosseum is referring to a specific structure, the Flavian Amphitheater, which we call the Colosseum. Every kind of Roman town, city had an arena. Most of them, especially kind of the larger ones, would have had a circus as well. But the Circus Maximus refers specifically to the track in Rome next to the Palatine Hill, which is by far the largest. So I think estimates are, I don't know, the Colosseum held like 50,000 people or something like that. The Circus Maximus held between 200 and 250,000 people. So it
Oh.
dwarfs the
Mm.
arena in terms of popularity. And this is just, not something that most people realize unless you study it, because we are bombarded with gladiators, right? And the concept of gladiatorial combat as the most sort of powerful, significant form of entertainment in the Roman world. And certainly it is significant, and it's used from the like sort of late Republic onwards as propaganda and ways to sort of, pandemize or, gain the love of the populace and the support of the mob and all of that. But chariot racing blew it out of the water. Just completely blew it out of the water. Yeah. So in other towns, I mean, in Italy or across the Roman Empire, in the provinces, they wouldn't have Circus Maximus. So that is specifically the big one in Rome, but they would have their own circuses or hippodromes. And yeah, they would have been smaller, but still, quite large venues because of the popularity of the sport across the Roman Empire. Even into sort of the Byzantine period. And in Constantinople slash Byzantium slash the city of many, many names, into the reigns of like the Emperor Justinian and stuff, the circus, the hippodrome, as they called it, they spoke Greek primarily, was just so incredibly powerful and important. And there were actually riots that happen around the whole chariot racing, which we can talk about. We sort of get into the factions and just the sheer insanity the Romans had for their racing ponies.
Yeah, well, good thing I had planned to build up to that because I had it all planned out in my head. But also, I'm going to also kind of withdraw half of my apology to Ben-Hur then because they clearly said it was the Circus Maximus, and I was like,
No, no, that's in Rome. That's in Rome.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so half apology because now I'm going to say, yeah, that wrong, bad.
Lexi is slightly redeemed.
Exactly. Exactly. So, I feel so much better. Okay, yeah. So let's get into as we build up to factions and all that stuff. Let's start with who were driving these chariots,
Mhm.
man, and what kind of social status did you have if you were doing chariot stuff?
So when they start out, most charioteers are going to be enslaved individuals. And that's largely because chariot racing is incredibly dangerous. I mean, again, we think gladiators, but you could die in the arena. And we know that gladiators died in the arena and all of that. Um, as a charioteer, you are risking your life every time you get in that chariot. And we know that charioteers died both on the track in competition, but also in practice quite frequently. So yes, most charioteers start off as enslaved individuals, but they can gain their freedom. So whether they are manumitted for their success or more frequently, are able to purchase their freedom because unlike in the games in Greece, the Panhellenic games like the Olympics, where all you won was loads and loads of prestige and an olive wreath. At the chariot races in Rome or in the Roman Empire, you won money, lots and lots and lots of money. And obviously, the bulk of that money is going to go to the faction and that whole industry, but the charioteers would get a percentage, especially as they start to become celebrities, and so they could purchase their freedom. And so we do have some charioteers who become free, but keep racing, but they race as free individuals as opposed to enslaved individuals. But yeah, they are starting out as enslaved persons because it's just such a risky sport. And your chance of a very painful and violent death was very, very high. So yes, most free individuals are not going to decide, hey, I want to be a chariot racer. Or maybe they want to when they're kids and their parents are like, no, it's a terrible idea. Terrible idea. You can just support them instead. So yeah, enslaved persons.
Well, that almost sounds like the modern equivalent of the horse kids, right? I want to ride
Mhm.
horses.
I want to da,
No.
da, da, da.
Mm-mm.
So,
Yeah, like that. Are you sure you want to do that? No, I
sure,
think you can do.
pretty, yeah, yeah. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, chariot racing. And I guess if you want, we can talk about the danger element if you want to do that now, sort of
Yeah, let's get to it. I
moving
mean, we're
into
we're already dancing around it, so let's
yeah,
talk about the dangers,
the
kids.
dangers.
Don't be chariot racers.
So you have to understand, so the racing chariot, it's not like the big war chariot, that you see in Bronze Age art, Hittite reliefs and Egyptian reliefs and stuff like that, where it's like this big, almost like vehicle. Obviously, with chariot racing, you want everything to be as light as possible because the lighter it is, theoretically, the faster your horses are going to be able to run and the more endurance they'll have because they're not pulling as much weight. So it is this tiny little affair. Like you are basically standing on like a wicker floor. So it's not even like a solid surface. It kind of bounces. And then you have this kind of small wooden railing that kind of wraps around just the front of the chariot. And it comes up to about knee height. So you can kind of brace against it a bit. But that's it. There's no shocks. There's no seat belts. There's none of that. So, I mean, our charioteers must have had just wicked core strength, like abs of steel, and done lots of squats. And then you're holding on to two or four horses as well, right? And the reins and the equipment for that. And, they are yoked to the chariots. The two, in a four-horse chariot and a quadriga, the two center horses are, physically attached to the chariot through kind of the yoke, and then the horses on the outside are only kind of attached to the two center horses. So they've got a bit more movement. So you also have all of that going on with the horses. And because of the length of the races, and obviously your hands would get sweaty and all of that, the charioteers would actually wrap the reins. So the reins are what you're holding to control the horses. They would wrap the reins around their waist so that as their hands got sweaty, they wouldn't drop the reins. They wouldn't get too long because then they would lose control of their horses. So they also carried a knife at their belt so that if a wreck happened, they could try and cut themselves free from their horses before they got dragged to their death. So you're racing in these incredibly flimsy vehicles, like in terms of just any sort of support for the charioteer. You're trying to hold two or four very spicy, fired up racehorses while you're racing around this track. And while the Romans did have kind of purpose built tracks with sand and stuff down, it's still you're bouncing around and you're trying to navigate around other chariots who are also trying to navigate around you. The ends of the racetrack, the two ends were the most dangerous points because then you're trying to get as close to the spina, as close to that barrier to cut your corner as much as you can to save space. We know that there were different strategies that could be imposed to try and like block opponents and almost like play a crazy game of chicken to psych them out. So wrecks were super common. And like I said, we have epitaphs for charioteers who die on the track. The most famous, and we have epigrams as well. So the most famous charioteer is a guy named Scorpus, who kind of like shot to fame in his, by his early 20s, and then died on the track. And Marshall talks about Scorpus like Rome's darling, whose flame was kind of like put out too early because although he amassed a huge amount of wealth and became very, very famous, he did die on the racetrack. So it was very, yeah, very, very rare to have a long career and yeah, very risky. So
Oh,
not for the faint of heart, that's for sure.
yeah. I was like, oh man. Even just from just like describing it, I'm picturing like every kind of uh, version of it I've seen on screens, being like, okay, yeah, I see where they went there. Interesting choices.
Yeah.
Some of them are more accurate than others. And I think just knowing as much as we do about horses, they spook and they're
Yep.
interesting, and there's so many different types of horses. I think I did ask you some version of what types of horses existed in the ancient world, but we mostly talked about Greece and like Alexander's horses and stuff. But I don't know. I should have asked you this a long time ago. Are you a modern horse racing fan?
I like a thoroughbred. I love thoroughbreds. I think they're super cool. Um, I mean, I have friends who work in the the thoroughbred racing industry, and they're passionate about it, and they love their horses and give them incredible care. But I think, like with any industry, there's just so much money in it that you have people who are, do this and love the sport and love the horses, and they want to do it well, and they want to do it ethically, and they want to ensure that their horses, even after their racing career, get care, get love, get support, aren't like, don't get lost in the pipelines and like the slaughter pipelines and stuff like that. But yeah, then you have those who are obviously in it for the big, big, big money. I mean, modern racehorses that have good bloodlines sell for just mind-boggling amounts of money, like in the tens of millions of dollars. So, I mean, I appreciate it. I appreciate the beauty, the power, the history, the everything that's gone into creating like a top race, like a racehorse. Um, but then there's the kind of the darker side of it that, yeah, I wrestle with because,
No.
not everyone is as dedicated to the love and care of their racehorses as others.
I mean,
So,
it's true, it breaks my heart how horse breaks its leg, you put it down on the track. I'm like, well, you can rehab that. It won't make
well,
it forever.
sometimes, yeah. I mean,
Some
because
it
then the
depends.
problem becomes, I mean, here we are falling down a rabbit hole. You have these horses that are so fit, right? They're at like peak fitness level to be able to run. And well, vet med has come a long way in terms of being able to repair fractures. Some fractures aren't reparable, like they're shattered.
Yeah.
But even if you can, it's you then have to basically keep that horse in a sling and on stall rest for months. So you're
Yeah.
taking a horse that has been at like peak fitness level and running and moving and running and moving and like, super competitive, and now saying you kind of need to be immobile for however long. And then because they're such big animals, it can cause other problems, right? So because they're not weight bearing enough for legs, it can cause like laminitis and issues and ulcers and
Mm.
yeah. So it's come a long way, but we still sort of have to ask ourselves like what's actually in the best interest of the horse in the case of an injury like that. There was a many years ago, there was a famous racehorse called Barbaro who broke his leg, and I think he was a Kentucky Derby winner and stuff. And they did do the surgery and all of that, and it just he couldn't tolerate the rehab, the recovery. So yeah, horses like majestic as all get out, but incredibly fragile legs.
I know, because I remember the day that they
Yeah,
made the announcement that Barbara had died, and I was so sad.
yeah.
Like, no. But yeah, no, I mean, and I guess, I found a way to ask about modern horse racing only because all of that was meant to say, like, yeah, and I have problems with the way that we breed modern racehorses because you try to breed them and then the way their legs come out, you're like, okay, but that does not seem good. That does not seem healthy. But I guess it does what the sport does, um, and so that kind of leads back to the ancient world, which is did they have kind of specifications? Did they have like ideal things they wanted to see, and did they have these kinds of breeding issues, or were they not able to be that picky? And so they were like, okay, just horse, yes.
Well, so it's interesting. Like in the Roman literature, we do start to get a little more kind of specialization to a degree. So um, there is sort of just this standard idea of what a good horse is across, from Xenophon onwards, sort of the main texts we have that survive that describe the ideal horse, starting with Xenophon. And then we have Varro and Virgil in his Georgics, Columella and Oppian. And then going into the like late antiquity and the Byzantine period, it kind of continues on into then the medieval traditions. They all kind of describe a standard, well-built horse, kind of regardless of what it's being used for. It's just like here's good mechanics. Like here is a good body for a horse that is just going to be able to do things and not break down, and be athletic and versatile and suit all of these. So they're not necessarily describing like specifically a racehorse or specifically a war horse. And then when we get into the Roman literature, like Columella describes horses being bred for sort of war, or like what he calls the noble horse, because you got to have hierarchies. It's Rome, which is intended for the circus, right? So intended for racing. So he's not saying it's a specific breed. He's just sort of saying like slightly different quality of horse, right? So like the noble horses, like they're the most expensive and they're being bred for the circus. And then he has like the horses that you cross with donkeys to breed like the really good mules, and then kind of like your regular horses. So we aren't so much getting here as a specific breed for racing and a specific breed for war and a specific breed for kind of everyday work. But we do have coming from the Roman world, because racing just becomes a whole industry, which it isn't in the Greek world. In the Greek world, is very much a private, personal thing where it's like your own glory. Like, hey, I'm Alcibiades, I'm rich AF, and I have no filter, and I'm just like we're in the middle of the Peloponnesian War, and I'm gonna like show how awesome I am, and enter like 7 teams of in the Tethrapon in the 4 horse chariot race, and be like, whoa, look at me, Alcibiades. But yeah, glory. Oh, I'm going to share with Athens, but really, it's all about my ego. In the Roman world, it does become an industry, which we'll get into when we talk about the factions. And so you have breeding happening across the Roman Empire. And because, thankfully, because the Romans loved chariot racing so much, they made a lot of inscriptions about it. A lot of inscriptions about it. And not just the charioteers, but also inscriptions just dedicated to horses. And so there are some inscriptions that list the names of the horses, but then also where they came from. So where in the empire they were bred. So I'm not calling them breeds, but where they're coming from. And the sort of the best racehorses, or kind of the top place to go for racehorses for chariot racing, was Africa. So they'll have the designation AF. So coming from places like modern day Tunisia and Libya. But then also Spain, and like Cappadocia and stuff were kind of main areas for breeding these chariot horses. Again, keeping in mind that an ancient racehorse is going to look very different from a modern racehorse, because they're pulling chariots as opposed to being ridden, and the races are much longer, right? Thoroughbred racing, for example, in the US, the longest race, I think, is the Belmont Stakes, which is a mile and a half. Which is considerably shorter than what our Roman horses would have been running. So they are built for speed, but also for endurance. So it's a very different body shape, compared to, and also they just were smaller, right? As I think I talked about last time, big horses, very modern development. But yeah, so we have all of these inscriptions telling us where the best racehorses are coming from, the most successful racehorses are coming from. There's one charioteer who says that he is the best driver of African horses. Like that was his specialty, was sort of driving North African horses, and he is very proud of it. So yeah.
Oh, I love that. I know it's very funny because I am a horse racing fan despite all the things. So I do watch obviously the Triple Crown races, Breeders' Cup Classic, obviously. So it's very funny when I hear people, yeah, hyping up the Belmont, and they're like, it's the longest race a horse will ever run. It's the
Yeah,
graveyard of speed horses, yada yada yada.
a mile and a half.
And
It's
I'm
still
like,
like it's 2.5 minutes long.
yeah, and I'm
Like,
like, bro, it's still like under
yeah,
3 minutes.
yeah.
So
I mean, even when you compare that to like steeplechasing in the UK, like the Grand National is considerably longer with
yeah,
obstacles. But that's a whole other rabbit hole. But yeah, I mean, it's so a very different type of horse,
yeah.
right? Because you need one that has the endurance, but also has the build and the strength to pull the chariot, as opposed to having a tiny person perched on their back. Like, yeah,
E- Emphasis on that since, if you definitely are taller than certain thing, you're
yeah,
out. So I'm like, oh,
yeah,
although people were shorter back then,
yeah.
supposedly. So maybe, I don't know.
Supposedly, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
jury's
yeah,
still kind of out on that one.
Cheers,
But
yeah.
yeah, okay, so we have a lot of inscriptions. So I was gonna say, is there particular fun or favorite description of a horse that you have that you're like, this was super cute to read?
I just love their names because they sound so badass because they're in Latin. But then when you translate them to English, you're like, it's like they had children name them. Or like, did a survey and be like, what are we gonna call this tugboat? Like Bodie McBoatface. Like that's literally what they are. It's just in Latin. So it sounds cool. So like you have like speedy and lightning and stormy. So that they're naming them after like characteristics, or maybe what the horse looked like, um, or things that they want them to imbue, like victory and stuff. Like I think I have my desktop background on my computer at the university is it's a mosaic from North Africa. There's loads of awesome mosaics from North Africa because again, so many racehorses were being bred there, and that was where like kind of like the testing ground for a lot of horses who then would prove their mettle and then move on to the big tracks. And it's got like these four chariot horses, and they have their names, right? And it's like Lover and Cupid and Butterfly. But it sounds so much better because it's like Cupido. Like it's great. Yeah. So, and then you get like Romulus and yeah, like names of like characters from, wolf. There's lots of wolves and eagles, and, Aquilas and stuff like that.
Mm.
So yeah, it's great. Like they sound so great. And then you're like, no, it's like we asked a 5-year-old child to name this horse.
Yeah, but that's the thing about Greek and Latin. Everything sounds better in both.
Sounds better.
So if it's like a stupid name, unless
Yeah.
you know what it means, you're like, okay, that's pretty
That's
cool.
cool. I mean, one of my favorites, it's a sort of an epigram for a mare named Spedusa, so Speedy. And yeah, it goes to being like, basically like Spedusa, like you were super fast. But yeah, unmated in life, now you dwell in Leith. So she died, before she could be retired and used as a brood mare. So I just think it's very almost it is very humanizing in a sense, right? Like she's not just a horse, like she kind of imbues this thing and kind of this notion of like your life was cut short, but like you were so magnificent, like incredibly fast, like just so badass, like badass mare. But then yeah, this kind of mourning that she's died and now she dwells in the underworld. Which yeah, kind of tugs at the old heartstrings a little bit.
Oh, I mean, I'm constantly kind of like not shocked, but also sort of a little bit shocked when like horses as creatures, they've always kind of been the same. So it's very funny that I'm like, one day I really want to endeavor to find some kind of inscription, something that was like, oh yes, I owned two geldings. They collectively shared one brain cell because they're dumb. Like, give me that
Give
on
me
an
that. Give me that.
inscription.
Like, stop making them so noble. I mean, they are noble. They're great, but they're also just raging idiots sometimes.
Yes. So I'm like, where is the inscription that says that? That is
Like
what I
my
want.
gelding, he was a derp, or whatever the Latin version of derp is, or the Greek version of derp is. He
Hmm.
was delightful, but dumb. But
We
no, it's always like, oh, they're so, yeah. I don't know.
well, if we can't find one, I may just create one.
Just maybe just needs me, but make one. Like maybe listeners can like write in and be like, give us your derpiest horse inscription,
Please, please, yes.
please.
And make it sound cool.
Make it sound cool.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
like my gelding. He's such a derp. I love him. He's amazing. But like, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
seriously though,
The brain cell quotient sometimes is questionable.
they collectively share one. It's like orange cats. Orange
Yeah,
cats
yeah,
collectively share
yeah.
one brain
Like
cell.
ginger cats and geldings.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
the G thing. Ginger cats and geldings.
Yes, I know, because there's this one cat that I love. And funnily enough, at like this horse place in Naxos where I love to go ride, he's one of the stray Greek cats who just kind of like stays around the property. And we have kind of the hoses where we fill up the water buckets and stuff. And I remember we left it running, and then I come out and I see this cat, and he's trying so hard to drink the running water, but he's sitting under it, so it's going on his head and it's going like on his sides, and he's sitting there just kind of with his tongue like going out like trying to drink, and I'm like, it's on your head, just move
It's right,
your
right
face,
there.
your body. And he just would sit there. I mean, this cat.
But I guess for like listeners who are like, okay, we get the ginger cat thing. What the hell's a gelding? So a gelding is a castrated male horse. So an intact male horse is a stallion, a mare is a mare, and then yeah, a gelding is a castrated male horse. So he's had his testicles removed.
He
And
ain't gonna
yes,
be
they do
real.
have a reputation. They are much more tractable because they aren't hormonal, so they tend to be like a little more mellow. That's not to say they don't have their moments. My craterus turns into a kite on a regular basis. But yeah, they tend to be a little more level-headed, but they can also be just quite, I don't know, derpy. There's a stereotype about that. But yeah, like I don't know, my Craterus, who's still young. So, but yeah, last year we had him at an event. And it was indoors. It was at the Aggie Days. It's this huge public like education thing we do here in Calgary, kind of bringing the ranch to the city. And so he normally lives outside, but he was in this big enclosure with his buddy and had a water bucket, which he does know how to drink from. But the light was shining on it funny. So he was terrified of drinking from his water bucket because of the light, the overhead lights from the ceiling reflecting on the water. And he'd like walk up and go, what's wrong with you? You are clearly thirsty. And yeah, his little gelding brain couldn't figure out the reflection
You
on the
know,
bucket. He eventually got over it because he was down there for like 5 days. So he eventually figured it out. But yeah. And yet we rode these to war.
Yeah, I know. It's very funny because my
This,
friend, she rides in the UK, and she was saying that she brought her thoroughbred rooster um, down a random like dirt road, and he was terrified of the big, bad, scary orange cones and the
yeah, those are
pigeons
terrifying.
that would land on
Hmm.
them.
Hmm.
Hmm.
hmm Yeah, horrifying. Like
And,
they're gonna eat you. They're gonna destroy your soul. Yeah, and this is why I do the research that I do, because
I mean,
who thought this was a good idea? And yet here we are.
and that's to say nothing of the biggest, baddest, scariest plastic bag on earth.
Yeah, plastic bags have been the undoing. That's why we could ride them to war, because we didn't have plastic bags yet. That's
You
what it
know
was.
what?
If there was
We
a
solved
plastic
it.
bag, it would have ended Bucephalus. Alexander would have been screwed if there was a plastic bag.
We've solved
We
the
solved the
mystery.
mystery. There were no plastic cones, no orange cones, and no plastic bags.
We've done it.
That's why it worked, right? I can
We've done it.
retire now. My job is done.
No, no, you can't. No, 'cause you have to go over the world and lecture about how we've
Right,
solved,
about
like the
how
reason
if
they were
there had been
successful.
plastic bags, world history would have been very different.
Exactly. And orange cones.
And
So
orange cones, yeah.
nah, you
And
got your
tarp.
work cut
Don't
out.
forget the blue tarps as well.
Oh yes, of course. I mean, so
Basically anything made of plastic.
yeah, really.
Yeah.
Any,
No.
or my favorite, the invisible big bad that you cannot
Mm.
see, that you've gone this way 1,000 times and it's
I
still,
mean, it's there. It's
but
there.
it's there.
Yeah.
They know.
Although to be fair, at Olympia they did have they called it the Tarachipos, the horse terrifier, which was at one corner of the arena, and there was nothing there. They just thought that there was some demon type thing that inhabited it because there would be lots of crashes there. So you
God,
know,
we love these things for some unknown reason because they're ridiculous.
ridiculous. Yeah.
Oh
So
man. Well, I do
yeah.
want to get to the factions because I
Yes.
also have been reading a lot of Byzantine stuff.
Hmm.
And I know obviously we have the Nika riots and all these things with Justinian. And a lot of activity takes place kind of, in the Hippodrome there. But before we do that, because I just don't want to forget, and also for the other half of people who might be like, oh, Romans and their horses, but also not just um, racing and sport and spectacle the whole time. Quickly, I do want to get to like the actual Roman war machine,
Mhm.
using them. So I know you do a lot of really cool experimental archaeology things, and I'm very jealous and can't wait to do that myself at some point. Um, so I had a lovely conversation with Lindsay Allison Jones, who is the historical consultant for the Eagle film,
Yes.
and she dropped this wonderful little sort of behind the scenes thing where she said she fought for historically accurate Roman saddles, which of course did not have stirrups.
Mhm.
And then I was like, great, that's awesome. But she also didn't really describe what made a Roman saddle different from a Greek saddle or any other saddle. And
Mhm.
so I'm like, I know you've tried most of them, if not all of them.
Yeah.
So why don't
Yeah.
you enlighten us and tell us, yeah, those Roman saddles, man, with no strips, they sound kind of scary. Please.
Yeah, they're awesome. They're awesome. I love my Roman saddle. It's like my favorite one of my favorite things to ride in. It's
Mm.
sweet. Okay, so yes. The Greeks didn't have saddles. They had ooh, things are falling off my computer. It's got attacked by a fox. Uh, they rode either just completely bareback or with like saddle, what we call saddle cloths, which is a bit of a misnomer because there was no saddle on them, but basically like a cloth or an animal skin on the horse's back. So kind of between your bum and the horse's back, which really just helps to absorb sweat and reduces friction because that's a thing. And trust me, it's not comfortable. But then yes, when we get into the Roman period, we get something we call it a Roman saddle. I think it's actually like found in kind of the bogs of Northern Europe, but it's during the Roman period. So when we call it a saddle, it's what we call the first treed saddle, which does not mean it is made out of a, well, it does have wood in it, but it's not a tree. So a tree is the structure inside of a saddle that gives it its shape. So it tends to be quite firm. So it's what actually like builds a framework for the saddle and lifts it up off the horse's back. So you're not like sitting directly in contact with their back, but you have like substance underneath you. Um, and so the Roman saddle is, as far as we can tell, the earliest treed saddle that exists. There's been a number of different reconstructions made. Kind of one of the earliest ones was Peter Connolly, who did a lot of work on reconstructing ancient. attack and equipment and armor and stuff like that. And it's really cool. So it has four horns. But as opposed to like a modern Western saddle, where the horn is kind of in the middle, the pommel is in the middle of the front of the saddle, the Roman saddle has a horn on each corner of the saddle. So think of it as like a rectangle, and then each corner of that rectangle has a horn or a pommel. There is some debate over whether those pommels were rigid or soft, because they would kind of curl up over your thighs. So the idea is, even though it doesn't have stirrups. So stirrups are what we have on saddles now. That's where your feet go to give you kind of a base of support, so you can stand up and stuff like that, and help you keep your balance. The Roman saddles didn't have those, but once you are literally wedged into this thing, because the seat fits quite tight around your bum, it's really hard to fall out of. It's actually really hard to get out of. Because you have to lift yourself. The pommels are several inches high, right? They're probably, 4 or 5 inches high. So you do have to like lift yourself out of it to get off. And really embarrassing moment that thankfully, I don't know why I'm now announcing this on podcast. But yeah, this was a few years ago, and we were doing a film photo shoot thing for something. And so I had the Roman saddle. My late great Bert and I was in the Roman soldiers. Roman cavalry rode in chainmail, lorica, hamada, or scale armor. They didn't wear what you typically see legionaries wearing, sort of the plate armor, the lorica segmentata. So I had my chainmail, Roman chainmail on, and the whole thing. And I went to get out of the saddle, and of course heavier than I normally would be because I'm wearing armor and a helmet and all of the helmet and all those things. And I go and I like lift myself up, but I didn't give myself enough oomph, and my chainmail got like hooked over one of the horns as I'm trying. So I'm like flailing there and trying to like, I don't know, armbar like do a pull up back into the saddle as I'm wailing, like flailing around like some sort of beached whale. Because I mean, it's not like chainmail has stretch to it, right? It's not like my hoodie got stuck on the horn and I just have to like yoink it up. So I'm like hanging off as the saddle is like sliding down because I'm heavy with this armor on, and trying to like yoink the chainmail off the horn as Bert, bless him, is just standing there being like, "What is wrong with you, you idiot human? Like, why are you just?" And I'm like, no one saw that, right? Like, no one saw that. And I did eventually unhook myself and get safely back to the ground with just an embarrassed face. And yeah, so it's one of those things. Like, it is to get into it and get out of it is a challenge, especially like thinking that, sure, I can use like a mounting block to heave myself onto my horse's back, but like you had to be able to vault on in your armor, and then get off without getting stuck. So yeah, that was kind of one of the big, I guess, advances that we get through the Roman Empire, is the spread of this early saddle, which then, I mean, you are perfectly capable of riding in full armor, different forms of armor without any type of saddle, right? Like that is one of the myths that I bust all the time. But it does obviously give a bit more support to the horse, so your armor is not directly on the horse's back, and it does allow you to be a bit more secure as you're wearing heavier armor, sort of in this arms race, as like the weapons get bigger, and then the armor gets heavier, and the weapons get bigger, and the armor gets heavier. So we start to get like the kind of fully armored cataphracts, so like the early, what we would call like heavily armored cavalry, where the horses are in armored blankets and the riders are in like head to toe, like armored leggings and armored shirts and stuff like that. And the horn saddle does help a little bit with that. Like it does give you a little bit more support. It's not necessary, and it's not universally adopted. So it's not like once the saddle appears, you see it everywhere in the art. It's kind of hit or miss in terms of where it's being used and like where it's not being used. So equestrian, super traditionalist. We don't like change. Like it takes a while to convince us that this is a good idea. So, but then does start this sort of technological revolution that leads to all of the different kinds of saddles that we see over the years, over the
Mhm.
millennia.
Well, the ways of war change with time, obviously. Alexander thought it was a great idea to bring horses all the way to the Indus River. There's other creatures and elephants and things roaming around, and we're like, okay, uh, interesting thing to bring your horses to. So obviously the Roman war machine has changed. You start having things like, the Greeks didn't really do battle formations like the turtle. I don't think so. I don't think they anticipate.
No, no, that's and we do know of so the turtle, the testudo, where the legionaries would link their big scuda together, their big shields, and kind of make like a moving block so that they could besiege things and stuff like that. I mean, speaking of spectacle, so when it comes to horses, the only form, like it wasn't just the sport version of spectacle, there was a military version of the spectacle as well, because the Romans, Rome itself was not really uh, the sort of producing a lot of cavalry. Most of the cavalry that we get in the Roman army are in the auxiliary units. So they are coming from the provinces as opposed to Rome itself. And so they're called ally, sort of the wings. And what we then get is the need to train these horses and soldiers for war. I mean, that is why a lot of our horse sports were created in the first place, was to train horses to be like, okay, let's go to war. I'm going to trust my rider. So the Romans have something called the Hippica Gymnasia, which is a Greek word, Greek phrase. It just means like the horse exercises, right? Gymnasium. Although they were not doing this naked, as opposed to in a Greek gymnasium. And we do have a text, Arrian's Ars Tactica, talks about it, sort of the art of war, and it describes the Hippica Gymnasia. So these were shows, displays put on for like emperors and dignitaries and stuff like that, where members of the Roman cavalry would ride through kind of set patterns and routines, kind of showing off their martial skill. But it wasn't just like a musical ride type thing. Like they are doing formations, they're doing charges, they're throwing javelins at each other, they're doing sword fighting. So they also had spectacle that was military. And it does refer to almost a sort of testudo formation on horseback as well. The cavalry shields were different. They were oval shaped as opposed to rectangular. But yeah, so the Romans just liked a spectacle, which isn't surprising. But yeah, so the Hippica Gymnasia was something that was going on. And again, thinking of like the training of Roman war horses, one of the kind of common training tools in modern equestrianism, regardless of your discipline, is something called a round ring, which is exactly what it sounds like. It is an enclosed space that is round. And it's where often you start horses, you sort of break them in. It's a confined space. You can kind of control their movement. We have an ancient Roman round ring from Britain, I think the fort at Lund. It's called a gyrus. It's round. And they also did long reining. We have tombstones for Roman soldiers. So long reining is where you are on the ground and you're kind of driving your horse in front of you. You're not in a chariot, you're walking. And again, it's a way that we often start horses and train them and get them used to all sorts of different scary things without being on top of them. So yeah, we have evidence for long reining as well from the ancient Roman world. And yeah, there's a number of tombstones that show soldiers doing this. So that cool continuity.
Interesting. Yeah, I was gonna say, well, I don't know. I think my from afar impression is like, yeah, the Greeks really, those cavalry charges, they rode their horses into battle, whatever. And then by the time the Romans come in, and they are very spectacly about all of their things. Look at us, we're Rome. Look at our,
Yep.
war machines and our instruments and our formations. Be awed and impressed by us. Yeah, no, it seems like it very much is all more about show than practicality. That is my impression, at least. So, it's interesting because when you look at some of the portrayals of how horses or chariots were used back in, I mean, even back into like Homer, whatever.
Yeah.
My impression is like, oh yeah, a chariot was like an ancient Uber. It would just bring you to the battlefield. You get
Yep.
down, it leaves, and then presuming you're still alive, it comes back, it picks you up and
It's you.
takes you to your camp, which I think is brilliant. Um, but by the time of the Romans, man, did they even really use those? Or was it again more for show, kind
It
of
was
again?
more for show.
Agree.
So yeah, I mean, like we get different forms of ancient chariot warfare. So yeah, the Homeric version, the Homeric taxi service, that's what I like to call it. And that is by and large just dictated by the environment in Greece where there aren't a lot of big open spaces to have like chariot combat. In the Near East, Egypt, kind of Near East, we do get actual like fighting from the chariots. So with the Hittites and the Egyptians and stuff like the Battle of Kadesh and so on and so forth, they aren't just like driving and getting off. They are actually maneuvering the chariots on the battlefield and fighting from them as like a mobile fighting platform because they just had the space to do it. Of course, very famously at the Battle of Gaugamela, between Alexander the Great and Darius, the king of Persia, Darius the Third. Darius does like bust out the chariots, which are like totally like anachronistic by now. Like no one is using chariots on the battlefield anymore. and in an attempt to kind of try and like psychological warfare against the Macedonians and the Greeks and stuff, and it doesn't really work. And then yeah, in the Anabasis, the March of the 10,000, right? Again, I think there's some reference to attempting to use chariots in I think it's the Battle of Cunaxa or something, and they're not the most practical thing to use on the battlefield because they are difficult to maneuver and they need a lot of space and prep work. And it's kind of like if the first attempt doesn't work, trying to like shock your opponents into like breaking their phalanx or breaking ranks or whatever, then you're kind of just screwed. As opposed to in ancient Bronze Age, Near Eastern warfare, where chariots are actually part of a tactical approach to battle. So yeah, but no, the Romans don't fight from chariots. I mean, obviously they have chariots for chariot racing. Even like the Etruscans, like we get chariot burials, but these are ceremonial. So they're being used like most famously in Rome, they're used in triumphal parades, right? The general rides in a massive four-horse chariot, very different from the racing chariot, super ornate and heavy, and yeah. But no, not for warfare. No, no chariots on the battlefield.
Yeah, that was kind of my impression. I mean, those Romans, man. Although it's interesting that you mentioned Egypt, because now I'm just very curious. Have you read River God by Wilbur
I have
Smith?
not. I
Okay.
haven't. I should,
So
I guess.
I read it when I was young and it became instantly my favorite book. It's this, without being spoilery, it's kind of like um, a book that takes you through a fictionalized account of what happens when the Egyptians flee Egypt down into Nubia during the Second Intermediate Period because the Hittites come in with their chariots, with their horses. They're scary. And one of the things that I always loved about this book, even though it's very dated, it was written 80s, 90s, something like that.
Yeah, a long time ago. Yeah.
It's a lot of like inappropriate language now that is not super PC, but like, hey, you got to take it for like it was written back then.
Cultural context.
Exactly, exactly. And so there's this beautiful description of our main character who discovers a herd of the Hyksos horses and literally the book is like, yeah, this is where we're going to just describe like the introduction of the horse and the chariot to Egypt. And you're like, oh, okay. But you get these beautiful scenes described and then of course, since I was young, I've memorized the names of all. So we have the teams. We have Patience and Blade, Rock and Chain, which are suitably like ridiculous names, but you're like,
Suitably ridiculous. Yeah. Oh.
but yeah, so then you kind of connect with this main horse. Her name is Patience. She's a mare. She has a foal. And it's so cute. And I mean, it's just the most wonderful description of like human horse relationships. So I'm like, if you have not read, I
I
highly
gotta read it. I'll
you gotta read it.
add to my list. Gotta read
You,
it.
you gotta read it because it's amazing. So
And
I
it's like
know.
popped up a few times. I'm like, oh, I should read this book. Like I know it's been around for a while. I should give it a go. So
I
yeah.
think you should, and then you should, tell me what you think because it's amazing. So, okay, well, that was a fun aside because I always have to shoehorn some mention of River God and the amazing horses and things in that book. So that
But
was a
kind of like cutting back to like sort of this human horse relationship and
Mhm.
and these the Romans and their spectacle and like again horses in war and horses in chariot racing. So like we talked about how dangerous chariot racing was for the charioteers. Obviously, it's very dangerous for the horses as well. Like they are also dying on the racetrack because you have these wrecks, and just like now, horses have weirdly fragile legs. They can take a certain type of force. They can take like straight on force, but they can't take transverse force. Just the way their bones are built. So anything coming at them from the side, like a twisting force, is what tends to cause catastrophic injuries, as opposed to like a blunt force just to the front of the leg. Rabbit holes I've fallen down in my research. But please don't go around hitting your horse's legs. Just don't do that. But yes, that's bad. We are not. No, don't test this theory out. But so the Romans, I mean, most ancient cultures very superstitious. The Romans are exceptionally superstitious, a lot, and so they themselves like would have their own kind of apotropaic, like evil wording off things that they would wear. They had them for their ponies too, and so both on the battlefield and on the racetrack, they had like horse necklaces with flareae, or so like amulets, apotropaic charms that they would put on their horses. So they are putting them in danger, but they are also like, want to keep my bestie safe. So, and you can see these necklaces in, again, in the art. So both with the chariot horses and the war horses, and it always makes me very happy. Yeah, they put these lucky charms on their horses, their ponies, to try and protect them.
Oh, oh,
So go
so sweet.
Romans. There's a lot of questionable things you did, but lucky necklaces for your ponies. I'm on board with that.
Well, at least we have that. Well, this is
Exactly.
perfect because this takes us right up to the latest point chronologically that I even feel remotely comfortable even talking about, which is the Byzantines and their horses, where we luckily get some circus and faction activity. Um, so I know that these factions really had a lot of political power, and there's a lot of riots happening around the hippodromes and stuff. So yeah, please, for the people who have not read Peter Sayres's new book,
Mm.
Justinian, which is really great. So I'm going to hype that up. And it talks a lot about the factions, especially the blues and the greens. Yeah, tell us about factions. What were they? Why is it so important?
Okay, so when going back to the early, like sort of the early mid Republic, we have these sort of stories, in like Livy and stuff, the propaganda about where chariot racing came from. So kind of two strands of thought. One is that again, it comes from southern Italy and the Greek influence down there. Another that is coming from the Etruscans, because again, we know that the Etruscans were super into horses. We have lots of chariot related stuff, tack equipment, that comes from their burials, from their tombs, but also horses appear quite frequently in Etruscan art as well. So they like and if you think of Etruria kind of being modern day Tuscany, that is still kind of like a prime horse breeding area. It's where the Italian cowboys come from, the Buteri. They're awesome. It's great, like Italian cowboys, and kind of that whole tradition. So it's a kind of an imported idea, like with many forms of spectacle in the Roman world. When the Romans are trying to understand the origin of this, they kind of tie it to funerals and funeral games and ways of commemorating and honoring the dead. We get this for chariots and gladiators, and then it kind of starts to become a way of you get these ludi, right, games put on. So the munera are like the games that involve sort of gladiators and stuff like that, and sort of the wild beast fights, or wild animal the exotic animals, whereas the ludi are kind of the chariot racing. And so there's a million festivals in the Roman calendar, always for the gods, and chariot racing becomes part of these festivals. So, and as the popularity is growing, chariot racing becomes a way to gain political power or political influence. So when we have like our aediles, which are one of the sort of political offices that you can be elected to, one of the early ones, this was often a chance for a young man to kind of make or break his political career. So you would basically bankrupt yourself to put on these spectacular games, right? So like the better the games, like we have, letters like someone writing to Cicero when he was governor in what is now Turkey, being like, "Dear God, I need leopards. Please send me leopards. I have promised leopards. Get me leopards." And he's like, "There are no leopards left in the Taurus Mountains. I don't know what you're talking about," right? So, and chariot racing becomes part of this. And so it kind of starts off as more of a private enterprise. And then the Romans love commodification. They quickly realize there's a lot of money in this. So you get, rather than people owning their own teams, being like, "Hi, I'm Lucius, whoever, and I've got like three teams of racehorses that I can, race in these games and get the glory." We get an industry, and it's a whole industry around chariot racing. And central to these industry are the four teams, which we call the factions, the factiones. And they're named after colors. So there's the blues, the greens, the reds, and the whites. And when I talk about it, it really is an industry. So within these factions, within these stables, like you have the faction manager, so the guy who kind of oversees everything. You have veterinarians, you have trainers, you have grooms, you have experienced charioteers, you have apprentices, you have cooks, like you would live in the stables, like you would live in your faction kind of compound. You have blacksmiths who are building things and repairing things, and carpenters. We have inscriptions that kind of list all of these people who were part of making this thing happen. And so these factions then start to gain a lot of power, because when someone wanted to put on games, put on ludi, they had to go and negotiate with the faction managers hiring X number of chariots, right? So they would go to all four, to the four factions or whatever, and be like, "Hey, I'm going to throw 10 days of games. I want to have, and you could have like in a single day something like 24 chariot races. Like it's an obscene number of horses that you need, and just like support staff infrastructure. And so they'd go to them and they would basically negotiate a contract. And what the faction managers very quickly realize is these people are desperate for this, right? Like the mob is demanding chariot races, so we can charge whatever the hell we want. So it almost becomes like a mafia type control thing of like, well, you want this, then we'll pay it. And we do actually have a story, which I think is from the reign of Nero, so early in the Julio Claudian period, so early in the imperial period, and the faction leaders were just being dicks, and they were like just wanting to charge some stupid amount, and so the guy who was trying to hire chariots for the games said, "Fine, then I will run dogs." And Nero freaked out. He's like, "No." Because people will lose their minds. Also, Nero loved chariot racing. And he's like, I'll pay for it. And then, kind of after this, there is a bit more kind of imperial control over the factions. So they become a huge part of Roman society across the empire. And you sort of become devoted to your color, your faction. So I often compare it to like the closest comparator I can think of in the modern world is like soccer, so football, in like Europe or South America, where like people are just so intensely devoted to their team. Um, and yeah, and you have certain guilds and stuff and groups that are like, the blues, the greens, the reds, the whites, and they're all kind of trying to outdo each other with their devotion. Um, a colleague of mine in the States who does a lot of work on chariot racing, Dr. Sinclair Bell, he's talked about kind of the pop culture around chariot racing, and like you get fashion that's inspired by it. It's like little kids, being dressed in like little green charioteer outfits because the charioteers would wear their color, right? So they'd be wearing red, white, blue, or green. There are tombstones where it's like the person has nothing, their job is nothing related to chariot racing. They are not part of this industry. They're like middle manager bureaucrats or something. But like on their tombstone, they're putting like on there their favorite charioteer and their favorite horses. Like it's insane. We've got lamps, we've got toys, we've got souvenirs, we have entire like mosaics and stuff, like just celebrating this because it becomes so popular. So these factions become huge, right? It's like becomes part of your identity. I'm a blue, I'm a green, I'm a red, I'm a white. And so when things didn't go their way, they could become quite temperamental. And riots could break out. Like if you find yourself sitting in the wrong part of the hippodrome, wearing the wrong color, that's not going to be fun for you. And so controlling the factions and controlling the circus or the hippodrome, controlling the racing gave the emperor power. So this is where we get the saying, which Juvenal is coined by Juvenal, the Roman satirist Juvenal, "Panime circenses," bread and circuses. Keep the people fed, give them racehorses, and they won't revolt. And yes, so what we do start to see is the factions can, once we start to get into the Byzantine period, which is not my area of expertise, but can take on political tones as well. So famously, during the reign of the Emperor Justinian, we get the Nika riots, where the first Hagia Sophia is burnt down. And yeah, he ends up massacring loads of people, or has his soldiers massacre loads of people in the hippodrome because they're really upset with like, I think it's like taxation and generals and like people he has in charge. And so it's like this rare instance where the factions unite in kind of their just hatred, disgust, kind of fed upness with what is going on in their world and the choices that are being made by the emperor and his advisors and the government and stuff like that. And they express their discontent by, which must have been terrifying because normally the factions are trying to get at each other. So on those rare occasions where they actually unite, like that is a lot of angry sports fans. And it is where we get our idea of the fan from, right? This obsessed fan based devotion. There's a story that it was like a red charioteer died, and so they were having the funeral, and one of the fans, one of the apparently very deeply devoted red fans, threw himself on the funeral pyre. And so I think it was like the whites, sort of one of the rival team, was like, no, no, he just passed out from the incense because like that's like how do you one up that level of dedication that someone was basically willing to self-immolate themselves because their favorite charioteer died? Like, and again, reference to like the fan, like these super devoted super fans, like going and like smelling the horse's poo to make sure that they hadn't like been fed anything suspicious or like see like how are they doing? Are they ready to race? Like, yeah, just over the top dedication to to their fans, to their teams. Yeah.
I think I make a lot of jokes about the Brazilian fans, the French fans, rioting after, losing or winning the World Cup or
Yeah.
whatever. But yeah, it's still nothing compared to back then. I'd be hard pressed.
And then we get emperors who are super fans. It's kind of the most notorious are Caligula, Nero, and Domitian.
Of course.
Um, so Caligula, very famously, and I do want this to be true. I do desperately want it to be true. He had a favorite race. His favorite racehorse was named Incitatus, and he wanted to make him a senator. So someday I will get a T-shirt made that says Incitatus for consul, and like only like 5 people in the world will understand it, but it'll bring me great pleasure. And then yeah, Nero, huge fan. God, I think he was a fan. I think Nero was a supporter of the Greens. So
Mm.
I think if I'm recalling correctly, like he even has like the track in the Circus Maximus dyed green. And of course, Nero being Nero was like, oh, I can be a charioteer. And he's the one who's like, yeah, 10 horse chariots, boom, take that bitch. And he like fell out. Of course he did, but of course he still won because Nero. And then Domitian tries to introduce a new faction, the Imperial faction, which is the purples and the golds.
Of course. Of course.
Because
Of
Domitian,
course. Because of
yeah,
course that must happen. Obviously, I mean, how have they not thought of that sooner? Goodness.
yeah. And
Should have.
again, I think it's I can't remember if it's Marshall or Juvenal. I'm sorry, but yeah, these again epigrams talking about just the sheer, it must be Marshall, I think, talking about like the sheer popularity of the circus and even comparing to the big factions were the blues and the greens. Some people have kind of said like the reds and whites were like the farm team, and then you would start in the reds and the whites, and then you could be kind of like
Yeah.
traded into the blues and the greens.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, that it was like the sound of groaning and just horror coming from the Circus Maximus today, like is even worse than when we lost at Cannae, which of course was like the catastrophic defeat against Hannibal. So, you know, obviously there's an exaggeration there. Or like, my party is a safe space where people can talk about their factions and no one's going to try and stab each other, right? So just the
Yeah.
emotions run high with the chariot racing that
Yeah, I
comes
know.
out very clearly in the sources.
It's interesting because yeah, because was it? I can't. I never can remember. It's so embarrassing. But I'm like, I think was it Justinian was like famously member of the Blues. Was it the Blues? I can't remember. I thought it was the Blues. I need to read the book again because it's definitely mentioned.
Yeah, and there's another great series by a Canadian author, Guy Gabriel Kay. Oh, is it Sailing to Sorrentum? And I can't remember what the second book is called. So it's like a quasi history and fantasy. Like it's clearly set in Byzantium, and it is the reign of Justinian and Theodora. And but there are fantasy elements too, and so this mosaicist too. But yeah, there's some awesome descriptions of the chariot racing and the factions and the passion for them in there. So if you have not read the Sailing to Sorrentum series, it's 2 books. Highly recommend it.
Oh,
It's great.
yeah.
It's awesome. It's
All
one of
right.
my favorites
Okay. I
favorite
gotta.
sets of books.
All right.
Um,
I gotta pick that up from the store with all the other stacks
but
of.
yeah, like the emperor is like expected to care. Like I think Augustus got into trouble because he'd be like, God, stupid pony racing. Like I have so much work to do, and like you'd get shit for like doing work while the racing is happening. So you had to like pay attention and pretend to care about the races because people are like, screw you, you have to like what we like. Like this is so yeah.
Don't you
Yeah.
wish that was a thing? Like we have to put down all of our work because we have to pay attention to the
Gotta
poem.
watch the ponies. Gotta watch the ponies. Gotta watch the ponies run.
I wish that's something that
Um,
transferred over.
I know,
But
right?
okay, well, we're talking about books, so I want to have you plug yours.
So yeah, I've written a couple books. So if you want to learn more, I guess about ancient horse sport, so my first book, which is through IB Taurus, which is now owned by Bloomsbury, I believe, from Bucephalus to the horse in the ancient world, from Bucephalus to the hippodrome. It has a whole chapter in there on sport in Greece and Rome. And then if you are intrigued by Alexander from the first episode, Alexander and his super duper awesome horse Bucephalus. I love Bucephalus. I also need an I Heart Bucephalus t-shirt. These are the two things. I need Incitatus for console and I Heart Bucephalus. Also, Herodotus is my homeboy. That's another one I want. I'm currently in the throes of writing a book that will hopefully be, the draft will be finished in the next few months, on Alexander and his horse Bucephalus and kind of their reception, their mythologization and reception kind of from antiquity to the modern period. So yeah, that's been a fun adventure of looking at horses in Greek mythology. And then I just finished that chapter. And then yeah, sort of the real Bucephalus and then the crazy things that happen in the medieval tradition and stuff. Great. Great.
Oh, amazing. Okay, well, I will also pop in and say for your first book, there is a massive sale going on right now, which so I took well advantage of this massive sale.
Right? Because stupid expensive academic books.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's normally I think 160, so it's on sale right now for 116. Go get it right now. So mine should be arriving tomorrow, so hopefully I will have
Awesome.
that to hold in my hands tomorrow. I'm very excited. But I don't know how long the sale is going on. So if you're
Yeah.
listening to this, it might actually be over since this episode is going to
Yeah, I
be
think there's like an ebook version too that is maybe
okay.
a little less heinously expensive.
Okay. Or if you work at an academic institution, you can
Just
request
get your
it
library to
in the
get it
library.
or
Yeah.
interlibrary loan it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So I should prop that up. Use your libraries, guys, or
Yeah.
maybe even your local library. I don't know if they get
And then yeah, the Bucephalus book will be with Paul Grave Macmillan. So
okay. Well, that might be closer to being out by the time this episode drops. So I will,
yeah.
if it's out, I'll link it in the
Perfect.
show notes
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
you.
Drafts due. I think the manuscripts due the end of August.
Okay, cool. Oh,
So yeah.
yeah. Okay, cool. Well, I do want to end with one last kind of sillier, fun question.
Silly fun question.
And that's, I know you've had a lot of great places that you've traveled to and had so many cool experiences riding. Very jealous about the Mongolia. I like, wow. But I know there are still places you have not gone to ride. So for the person who has done it all, or almost all, quote unquote, where do you still want to go ride horses?
Oh, Lordy. I mean, not related to my research, because I mean, I guess anything with horses is related to my research, but in terms of geographical scope, I'd love to go ride in Patagonia, in Argentina. That would be with the gauchos. That would just be so super duper cool. Um, Turkmenistan, although it's a bit of a country. I for years rode a very cool, very special breed of horse from Turkmenistan called the Aklateki. I had a friend here in Alberta who bred them. She still does, but on a much smaller scale, and I love them. They're just the coolest horses. I'm usually not like, into a specific breed, but I do love a techie. Like I would love to have my own one day. Um, so I think it'd be really cool to go to Turkmenistan, propaganda and stuff aside, just to kind of ride them in the place they came from. Yeah, and yeah, I mean, my goal is to visit all the stands someday and ride horses in all of the stands. I've done Kyrgyzstan, so I've started. I have been to briefly Kazakhstan, had a layover there, but love to go back and ride as well. So yeah, all the stands, Central Asia, because it's like the birthplace of horse domestication. So obviously pretty cool and lots of nomadic tradition still. But I will say, related to our topic that we've been talking about today, and Roman chariot racing, one of again the coolest, most bizarre experiences of my life. Um, this was back in 2017, which was just before I started teaching at Mount Royal. Um, I got an email. I was visiting a friend in Bulgaria, and I got an email from a production company in the UK saying, "Hey, we're doing a documentary on Roman chariot racing, and your name was put forward, and we've read your book, and wondering if we could like chat with you about stuff." I'm like, "Yeah, like I'll be home back in Canada on this day. Cool, we'll call you the next morning." And like less than 2 weeks later, I was in Tunisia, filming a documentary on Roman chariot racing for the Smithsonian Channel. It's called Rome's Greatest Charioteer. It was also dubbed into like French and German. So it was like three different countries that were working on this production. or that was going to be released in, and it was wild. Like it was during one of our long weekends, our May long weekend. So I was there for like 5 days. It was the craziest long weekend of my life. Like we got the Bardo basically to ourselves, and I got to like climb up on scaffolding and like get like face to face with mosaics, and got to go to one of the state breeding farms for the barb horse, which is kind of like the native breed of Tunisia. Yeah, it was wild, absolutely wild. It was so much fun. Didn't get to ride, unfortunately, but I did get to cuddle a lot of super cute foals. So that made me pretty ecstatic. Yeah. So,
Oh, so many
and
great.
I think it's available on Amazon on the Smithsonian. I think there's a Smithsonian channel on Amazon Prime, so you can watch it there. It was actually like it's a two series episode. Sinclair's in it. Yeah,
I'll find it.
it was pretty well done. It was pretty cool. It was pretty cool.
Okay.
It was
Well,
quite
I'll
well done.
find it, link it so people can go watch that.
Yeah.
That
But
sounds
yeah, like the most bizarre 5 days of my life. I am flying to North Africa. Here we go.
no, there's so many good places to ride. I think my favorite so far,
You've ridden in Egypt, which I'm super jealous about.
yeah, I was gonna say, other than Greece, I've had the opportunity to ride in Egypt. You can just gallop in. There's two places really where you can go. You can go around the Great Pyramids of Giza, so on the Giza Plateau. You can just have and the guides are so skilled. I mean, they're here, one handing their horses, they're like phone in the other, and they're like, "Okay,
Yeah.
you go," and you're like, "Wait,
Go.
really?" And you're like, "Yeah, yeah, go, go."
Yeah,
And so
it's
then you
fine.
just start going, and then they're like next to you, and then you just happen to look to your side, and they're like filming you. They're like, "Yeah, woo!"
Yeah,
And you're
it's
like,
like
"Okay."
specialized skills can take videos while galloping on a horse of the
But
tourist, of the client.
what's even more impressive is all of the Egyptian tour guides are riding in flip-flops.
I know.
They're in like sandals. And I'm like, what? So, highly recommend everyone go ride in Egypt because I did ride around the pyramids, but then actually I thought it was a bit more fun because it's less crowded. If you go down a bit to Abu Sir, if you ride
Mm.
around the Abu Sir pyramids, it's like actually open desert. And it was very odd because I was like, can I just go galloping into the desert? And they're like, yeah, yeah, go
Yeah, go.
wherever.
Yeah, here you go. Horse will come back
And
eventually.
yeah, I mean, they don't tell you like how far or where. They're like, yeah, any direction you can go until it stops, honestly. So it was
Yeah.
just a really odd feeling because I remember being like, so I could ride this off into the desert possibly forever and never come back. And they're like, I
The
mean,
horse will probably come back, wants food, knows where his friends are. Like, he'll
yeah,
eventually turn itself around and you'll be with it or you won't.
exactly. So
I am going to the UK this summer because I'm giving a paper at the Leeds International Medieval Conference for the first time on Alexander and Bucephalus. And yeah, so my husband and I we're gonna do some vacay over there. So yeah, if this episode is out before July, if people have any recommendations about cool places to go do some like real riding in like Scotland or like Northern England or something, please like let us know. Because that'd be super cool. Because you always got to ride a horse when you go somewhere. That's my approach to life.
I'm like, I think this episode isn't due out now until like August or September,
Yeah,
but your
well,
first
anyways,
episode will be, so I
yeah,
can
yeah. Like,
mention
bam, got
something.
recommendations.
Exactly.
Let
All
me know.
right.
All
Man,
right.
I
I
swear
guess
we're
that's
gonna need
it.
like an episode three
We
because
are just
so much
like
I just didn't have.
random horses.
Random horses.
Oh
That's my
man.
kind of vibe. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
man, thanks for coming back. Like
Thanks for
always
having me
best talking about
back.
horses.
Great. Love talking about horses. All right.